Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm June Rawl, the Executive Director for IPD, and I'm so happy and thrilled that all of you are here with us today. Today's webinar, titled A Simple Approach for Launching Your IETs, will address the basic components for launching any IET with success. Joining us today to facilitate our conversation is Ariel Pachokis. Ariel is the Director of Adult and Community Education for the Collier County Public Schools. Joining him is Vanessa Alvarez, and Vanessa works really closely with Ariel as a resource teacher. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ariel, and to you, Vanessa, to launch our webinar for today. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, June. Thank you so much, and welcome, everyone. Excited to be here. Just a quick housekeeping before we begin. Please remember to use the Q&A for questions, as all attendee microphones will be muted and in listen-only mode. As we know there are going to be questions along the way, we will be pausing to address those questions entered in the Q&A. Finally, today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the IPD website within 48 hours for you to reference in the future. So hopefully that's helpful. So today we'll be sharing a little bit about our IET Master Schedule and the reason for creating one. We will share about where to start with building one, model the process, and some of our thinking in reference to each of the sections we complete, and hopefully answer some of your questions along the way. As we launch, let's back up a little bit. So why did we even create an IET Master Schedule? As we launched our first IET program, we realized that there were multiple components involved in ensuring a successful program. And it's the little things that are often forgotten. The Master Schedule kind of allowed for our entire team to have access to the critical information at a glance. It helped us in being deliberate and strategic regarding each of the components. It also helped us organize ourselves for marketing the programs, but it also helped organize our students and their lives prior to starting the IET. Finally, it provides us with a structure for a little bit of program reflection and accountability as we come to the end of the IET program.
And also you notice that we're using Google Excel for our master schedule. You can use a different format if you like, but the reason we use that is that it's shareable and live. So I could be updating information in the master schedule and someone could see it at that moment instead of us having to constantly exchange information.
So here's a snapshot of our master schedule, and at a glance, you can easily see that, and kind of like what Vanessa just shared, any one of our team members at any location can easily access the information of which IET is starting when and what time, when the information sessions will be held, the requirements for starting an IET. So very easily accessible and at one snapshot, especially as you create more program offerings. You're going to have different start dates, different information, different requirements perhaps. And so this is just an easy way for us to organize ourselves. Pardon me. So where do we start with building the IET Master Schedule? It should all begin with your approved IET Program of Study, where most of this information has already been laid out. While one person can put this together by themselves, we tackle it as a team to ensure that we haven't missed anything. We consider everything from our official work and program calendars to the possible instructors and classroom space. We then have long conversations about the target population to ensure that our content is at the appropriate level of rigor, and if our students will be successful in meeting the intended outcomes. We then discuss recruitment strategies, partners, finally discuss potential costs and any resources available for those unforeseen or for those costs. And part of that is if we can't find those resources, then we might also just have to have it considered for our students to pick up that cost.
So before we get on to our spreadsheet, which we're going to in a second, are there any questions so far?
So one question that often comes up, and I haven't seen any in the chat box, but one question that comes up with the costs are the
Certification exams.
Certification exams. Thank you. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Certification exams, and while we often are able to find resources to cover those costs. If we aren't able to find it, we know that the student's going to be responsible for it. And so we want to make sure that we've shared that information up front with the student prior to getting to the tail end and then trying to scramble, or the student not completing that certification exam because we didn't plan for it. So.
Great. Okay, so if there aren't any questions yet, we're going to go ahead and we're going to be practicing building our IET Master Schedule. So there's going to be two things that you'll notice. There's a QR code here if you want to follow along on your phone, or I'm going to put in the chat the Google shareable spreadsheet template. So let me put that in the chat right now. Now, if you want to build along with us today, that's fantastic. But you are also welcome to follow along with us and build later after the webinar, because I understand that sometimes it can be a lot to toggle back and forth between watching us and then also trying to build your own master schedule. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up this template right now. And this is what it's going to look like to you. You're going to go ahead and click make a copy. And now you'll have your template. So you'll notice that in row 2, we have an example IET already there for you. Our intro, that's just one of ours, intro to healthcare, just to provide kind of an example of where we're going with each of the categories here. And then row 3 is where we're going to be building a new one for our paraprofessional.
And I think the biggest piece to highlight here are all the little pieces that come into building a successful IET program, and we'll be highlighting those. And hopefully those are some good takeaways to consider as you're creating yours, or as you're refining and adjusting your current IETs.
Perfect. Okay, so going left to right, we're going to start with our program name. So this is the paraprofessional.
And the instructor for this class, we already know it'll be Carol. And like we mentioned before, we're really kind of referencing a lot of this information right from our program of study.
Perfect. So we know that from our program of study, that it's going to run approximately 10 weeks. So I'm going to put that for my program length as 10 weeks long.
Our programs here meet 3 nights a week. So in this particular case, the meeting days will be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then our meeting times are 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. Pretty straightforward so far.
So now, though, sometimes the more complicated part is trying to figure out the course dates and working around your schedule. So knowing that we typically have 19 to 20 weeks in a semester, we're going to try to squeeze 2 parapro sessions in this semester. So our spring semester starts January 16th, ends May 31st. We're going to have the first session start on January 17th, which is a Tuesday.
And it'll run roughly 10 weeks, ending on March 21st, which is a Thursday.
Right.
Since we're already here, we're going to go ahead and build out our next session as well, which will start right after spring break, March 26th. Again, a Tuesday, running another 10 weeks, ending May 30th.
All right, and you'll notice that this got really long here. So if you're not familiar with using Google Excel spreadsheets or Microsoft spreadsheets, this handy little wrap button is available for you. So I'm just going to wrap the text so it all fits nicely into that column there. So I've kind of got them stacked, my first one on top and then my second one on bottom.
So now that we've established our course dates, our next natural conversation and planning component is the information sessions. So we do formalized orientation information sessions prior to starting the program. And so we like to plan for this accordingly. And we like to plan for it about 2 weeks ahead of time. That provides us with enough time, not just to register the individual, to share information, but also to do the pre-testing that's required in our adulting programs.
So we're going to be looking at having them on, let's see here, January 24th, and we'll add another one in January 9th. That's just going to be for our first one. We can build our other one later as we get closer to March. So that was a lot of information really fast. So we're just going to pause for a moment here, especially if you're trying to build alongside of us. But you might want to think about some questions. One example of a question that comes up a lot is, how do you determine how long your IET needs to run for? And for us, we've kind of noticed that like where our spot tends to be is somewhere in that 10 to 15 week mark, tends to work best depending on whether we have certification exams that we need to prepare for, what are the expectations for what the students will need by the end of the class, how much material do we need to cover in that period of time. So 10 to 15 weeks tends to work best for our programs.
10 weeks is really a sweet spot for us, where we can run 2 IETs in the semester, like I mentioned before. 15 weeks kind of just allows for one. The other piece to this, or the other side to this, is having a program that's just long enough to ensure that the students make it to the finish line, because we know the longer we make the program, the more chances exist of student lives getting complicated and having to pause out.
Perfect. So
Awesome.
I know that this can be a little difficult to build and do this at the same time. So remember, you can always watch this again later and then pause as you build your own.
So then we get into the online component, which for many of you might not be and it's not a requirement, of course, but for us, we've started creating some programs that are kind of like a high flex, a hybrid model. And why do we do that? Because it helps ensure when things happen to our students, they're still able to connect. Plus, in some cases, like the Parapro, we have multiple locations where the students are able to connect from and participate in the IET as well.
Right. So our Parapro does use a high flex program. So they can, for example, tonight they're meeting and it's raining like crazy outside. The streets aren't really the greatest. Maybe there's a little bit of flooding. Instead of having a huge number of absentee students, we can offer them to join us from online or in person. And then I also noticed that June did have a good question about capturing where they meet. We don't have it in ours, but we really should add it, June, as far as what classrooms we tend to use, especially when we're doing these high flex classes. They need particular equipment. So yes, you can certainly add that into your master schedule. All right.
So we then move on to
Program description.
Program description. Again, the program description, this is a pretty straightforward one. It is basically just cut and pasted right out of our program of study. If it's a really long description, then we might tweak it a little bit, but yeah, we just take it right out of there. Then our tagline, it's just a synthesized version of the description. It's our elevator pitch, the attention getter for our students or for the target audience, because we might have one message that we give to our students. We might have a slightly different message that we might provide to our partners. And what do I mean by partners? As we're working on these IETs, our goals are to help transition students. So we have partners with that, business partners for the most part, that are the they're the employers, helping our students finish the program and then get into employment.
Right, and also we try to put these things on our website so students have the latest information, and tagline is kind of the attention getter, and then they can go in and see more detailed information about each of the classes.
Okay, so some of our IET programs, we have a certification component next, and so some of our IET programs have a industry certification. Others do not. So if they don't, we kind of leave it blank. In this particular case, the Parapro, it's the ETS Parapro exam. So we want to make sure it's listed. Again, why? Because if someone's asking, it helps us communicate that. We have a lot of different individuals that are answering the questions for our students when they ask. So this just ensures that we're all communicating the same message at all times.
Perfect. So the next thing we need to start thinking about is the completion goals. So basically, by the end of the 10 weeks, what growth should the students have demonstrated? Where should they be skill-wise? If the main goal is for the student to earn their Parapro certificate, we've learned from our experience from, teaching somewhat to the test, is we've learned from our experience that students are most successful at least at an advanced ESOL level, like an ESOL NRS 6, and then an ABE level of at least a 5. So I'm going to put that in there. And the reason being is the Parapro test has a lot of academic skills on it. Tends to be at at least a high school graduation level. So we want to make sure that before they take that certification exam, they're at least at a level 5 ABE. It doesn't mean that they won't pass if they're lower. We just know that that's kind of like the good spot.
So pausing there for a little bit just to make sure we don't have any questions or comments. We're seeing a couple pieces in the chat, but we'll come back to those. This was a big piece. So kind of like in our GED world, when we prepare our students for the GED, we know what kind of NRS level they're going to be most successful. We don't typically refer a student who's functioning at a level 2 NRS to go and take that GED test because the likelihood of them being successful is lower. So we're wanting to set them up for success. So as we're building our IETs, and from our experiences with our previous classes, we found that an ESOL NRS 6, that ABE NRS 5, is that ideal scenario. So having identified the completion goal, then that allows us to move into our
Admission guidelines.
Admission guidelines.
So our admission guidelines, and then I see some good questions here, so I'm going to pause after this. So the admission guidelines, these are going to be our own local guidelines. There are no hard set guidelines for where students need to be. We just find that, our experience of where we want them to be at the end, we need to be realistic about where they are when they're entering. So in this case, we're going to target an ESOL NRS level 5 and an ABE NRS level 4. Reason being, that's pretty realistic. We can't really expect them to go too much up in levels between when they come in and when they go, considering it's only a 10-week class. So sorry about my font there, but basically you can see that it's about 1 level lower coming in. That doesn't mean that we don't take students outside of these guidelines. We just know that these are the students that are most likely to succeed. So we do get students at a lower level than this, especially ones that are already employed in our school district. We're going to do everything we can to help those students. It just may take them a little bit longer.
So then here we have a common question that comes up with at this point is what happens when we have a student who comes in who doesn't fall within our admission guidelines, and do we just turn them away? Well, the answer is no. We don't turn our students away, or an individual coming in for the IET. We know that we have a program for that. So someone who comes in at a lower level, we're going to refer them to start either an ABE class or an ESOL program to bring them up in their reading and language skills to this level so that they can successfully then enter the 10-week course to prepare themselves for the Parapro or for whichever IET it is.
And I'm just looking in the Q&A, and I did see a good question from Andres. So he asked, on top of creating our master schedules for your schools, we create this schedule as well for IET only. And for us, we have a master schedule where we have all of our IETs listed out in one spreadsheet. So what you're looking at right now is the beginning of building an IET spreadsheet. So yes, it's a master schedule just for IET, separate from the other ones, just because IETs, are kind of their own little niche.
And again, going back to what we said earlier, part of this IET master schedule is really also there's a couple of pieces, but one, to ensure that whoever is asking is getting the question has the information available to respond to the question in the most accurate way. In addition to that, it's also holds us accountable for, we planned for something, when do we need to make sure that we've got everything planned out and laid out, so that the teacher knows when we're going to be doing post testing, so that the coordinator knows when we are going to be starting the program, so that we can market the program accurately, and everything has kind of a timeline. Otherwise, I'll be the first to say, I forget pieces, things get forgotten, and we miss those opportunities.
All right. All right. Moving on to accommodations. And so accommodations is interesting because coming from the K-12 world, we deal with accommodations all the time. But I, as a teacher, didn't hear as much of it in the adult ed world other than during our day-to-day classes. But with testing, our accommodations are available for parapro. It's going to vary on the test giver, so to speak. In this case, it's ETS. ETS does provide extended time for ELL students and students with disabilities, as long as they fill out the proper documentation. So I'm going to enter that in there, just knowing that having this information available makes it easier for us and the students to plan ahead.
And again, this is the intent here is when we know that someone has a need for that extended time and has the documented requirements. If we share this with the individuals up front, then they'll have the time available to go through the process. Because what we don't want to do is surprise them with it at the tail end when we're sitting down for the exam. One, they're not successful, then they share it that they have an accommodation, or they're not going to be testing with the regular cohort of students, and it might delay some time, maybe allowing for information that was prepared for to be forgotten.
Yeah, and so I work with a parapro class pretty often. The teacher is the main teacher, but they kind of use me as a support person. And still, we'll get students 2 or 3 weeks away from the test asking for extended time. So the earlier they know how to apply for extended time, the better, and therefore they're going to be ready to take it when they were planning to take it.
So that brings us into our transition plan, and this is a new component for us as well. Obviously we add things to our master schedule as they come up, and as we see pockets of missed opportunities in our previous cohorts, and where do we want to refine and build and extend on. So the transition plan is our newest piece. As our students come to the end of the program, we've learned that we need to help them transition to their next goal. For example, we work with future makers, or you might work with your local workforce development board, career source. Another example would be working with your local college, university, or technical center, because as they're coming into the IET should have it should be on a pathway. And what is that pathway? And the worst thing we can do is come to the end and say, okay, thank you for coming, and you're done. What we want to really do is have that handoff, transitioning them, in our case here, transitioning them to our technical college or our local college. If they have a pathway there, in the parapro's case, it's really moving them into employment. So that this becomes, and I just lost it. Well, train of thought.
So the last week of class, we plan to bring in all of these people. Doesn't mean that they don't come in earlier in the game. So for example, we have our human resources coming tonight to talk to our parapro class about employment. It's not even near the end of our current cohort, but we will bring them back in at the end, because what we've noticed with the parapro class, for example, is we teach them how to look for vacancies, how to apply, how to interview, but then they kind of freeze up at the end, and we've, are following up with them, asking what they've applied for. And some of them are like, I don't know, is this for me? And they just need a little extra hand-holding, so to speak. So that last week, we're going to plan to bring these people back in to talk to our students so that they can feel comfortable with the next steps.
So in this case, right now, we know that our program ends in March. So before it ends, we want to bring in some of these partners to do that, to do a transition expo, for lack of a better term. In this case, we are going to be looking at the last week of class, which is March 19th, and go through March 21st. Because what we'd like to do is we'll bring perhaps CCPS, Human Resources, on that Tuesday. Then we might bring in FGCU on that Wednesday, and then we'll need to make sure to bring in Future Makers on that Thursday, because each one of them provides a different resource support. And like I said, maybe it's not Future Makers, maybe it's Career Source to help refine their resumes or their interview skills, or help find different employment within our county.
So June has an excellent question. Would you let them know the next stackable credential they could obtain in this transition plan or this expo? And yes,
Great.
absolutely. So it's going to depend on each IET. For a parapro, that the next stackable credential could be within the parapro job, but also partnering with Florida Gulf Coast University, they have the option to continue on to get a 4-year degree as a teacher. FGCU has grants that they're trying to help the pipeline for teachers and try to fill those positions. So these parapro students have the option to continue on and get their 4-year degree for free or pretty close to it, and become a certified teacher. And then Andres was asking if the master schedule has a due date when it needs to be uploaded. For us, this is just kind of something we came up with because we need to get ourselves organized. So it doesn't have a due date, but the earlier you plan your master schedule out, probably the more organized you'll feel. You'll have the right information going out to the students. It's going to make things just flow a lot better.
Okay, and I'm gonna interrupt with that one, because there might be another piece to this question. So what we're doing here today is not a state requirement. There's nothing that needs to be submitted or uploaded to the state in reference to this. This is our internal local activity. This master schedule is something we do ourselves, just to keep us organized and moving in a common direction and ensuring that the message is always consistent. So just wanting to make sure we clarify that question.
So as you think about your transition plan, you might want to think about your own partners that you might have. So if you're working, for example, with a technical college, that would be a partner. So you might want to think about who's out there that you already know, and then who's out there that maybe you haven't made contact with.
Okay. So we've made it to the end of the transition plan. So then we started strong. We need to go ahead and kind of bring this to an end. So here we get to our post-test dates. Because this is an adult ed program, we want to ensure that we are post-testing each one of our students, because they are still enrolled in an adult ed program. And then that serves multiple components. It also helps us ensure that, did the student make a gain? But not only that, it allows us to kind of identify, if they made a gain, where are they? If they didn't, where are they? To ensure that we can prepare them before they go and sit for that parapro exam. Because at the end of the day, it's that certification that they're looking for.
And so I know that our program is scheduled to end March 21st. So we are going to decide that we're going to post-test the day before the last day, so that this gives time for any makeups that need to be done. The last day is also a great day to review post-test scores with our students. If they need any other prep work to do before they take that certification exam, we're going to see it in that post-test. And just kind of gives us an idea of what to expect. Some students might need a little more time.
Yeah, and again, it sounds very simple, and of an idea of putting a post-test date. Why would we even need to? I'll use my supervisor's favorite story that she likes to share of, and never lets me forget about it. From our first cohort of Parapro, she, as we came and we finished that cohort, she asked me, "Wow, how many of the students passed?" And as I responded, and then she followed up with her next question, right behind it. How many of the students just post-tested in their in their ABE tests? And I said, "Oh, I forgot to post-test them." And so it's one of those things. Well, as much as we know that there are components involved in it, there are a lot of moving pieces to these IET programs that easily get forgotten. And so I learned from the School of Hard Knocks.
All right, so now that we have our post-test date, the big question is certification exam date. So if your IET has a certification exam, typically we plan the certification exam date to be a week or 2 weeks after the end of the IET program. We plan for it to ensure the students plan for it, and that they have time to review, to get themselves kind of organized. Sometimes they might need to ask off of work depending on when the test is being offered. So we want to make sure that they know as far in advance as possible for when to expect that certification exam. So since our last day is going to be the 21st, we're just going to say that our certification exam date is on the 28th, 1 week later. Of course, it may vary depending on where your test is available. So I'm going to enter that information in there. I'm going to also make sure that my students have this date as soon as possible into the cohort so they can plan for childcare or getting off of work or what else they need to do. And then the big question, Ariel, is cost.
So then we have the last piece to this, and that's the cost. It's that this is one we often I've often forgotten to plan for, and we know that there are costs, hidden costs, often in running IETs. We know that all of our IETs is work to not only to launch but to ensure student success to the very finish. And we want to make sure that we share all of those components or all of those costs with the students upfront, so that they are aware of, one, the value they are getting from these IETs, but if everything is covered, but also more importantly, if they're going to be charged a fee, we want them to know that upfront ahead of time, so that when they get to that finish line, it's not a surprise and they're not scrambling. What are those costs? Well, we have the adult education registration fee, $30. But then we have the hidden costs that I shared before. And what is that hidden cost? Well, it's the Parapro exam. And in our county, it costs $65 for them to take. So we want to make sure, one, they're ready for it. They have those resources, or that we've planned for those resources to support them. But then we also want to ensure that they're successful once we use those resources, because now these certification exams are a little bit more costly than our typical post-test of CASAS and TAPE.
So it's not that the Parapro test fee, they're going to be giving us that money, but at least they're aware that there's $65 at the end that they need to account for. So when they go to take their Parapro exam, they have that ready for that day. So think about any questions that you have, and then if you don't have any questions, perfect. All right, so we're going to go back here. So if you don't have any questions, you can still reach out to us later with any questions or comments. So you've got our email addresses here.
And so next slide. And so at this point, we've come to the end of our presentation. Please take a moment to complete the IPDAY survey. I don't see many questions coming in.
Do have one question coming in
Okay.
as you're filling out the survey. Brenda asked, this template is just for us to keep track of our IET students. Is that correct? For us, we're using it to keep track of our IET programs. But it's funny that you bring that up, Brenda, because we have a couple upcoming IET Day webinars we want to tell you about, and one of them is going to talk about IET students. So as you are completing the IET Day survey, if you found today's webinar helpful, you may be interested in connecting Tuesday, November 28th for Tech Tuesday, Unlocking Insights, creating an Excel dashboard for adult general education data. And then again, for the students section, on Wednesday, November 29th, Ariel and I are going to share about setting up and using an IET program and a student success plan. So that's a whole other spreadsheet you get to hear about.
So thank you so much for participating today, and we look forward to seeing you in the near future, or sharing with you a little bit more in the near future, and have hopefully a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thanks, everyone.